For those of you who don't know us, we're Elena and Ryan, and we're sailing on a 26-foot catamaran called Kittiwake from the UK to the Mediterranean. We set off in May 2017, and before setting off we did a lot of research into how to quit our jobs and sail away. And we've also obviously picked up a few bits and bobs of information as we did it ourselves and started living this lifestyle. So we thought we'd make a short video to share our top tips with you on how to quit your jobs and sail away.
When you're just first starting out with the idea of going sail cruising, you'll probably want to take in as much inspirational material as you can. Some really good things to do are read the Pardies books. They're from a slightly different era, but the kind of spirit of cruising that they talk about is still very much alive, and it's a really good place to get inspired. There's also more modern books like Brave or Stupid by Janne Larsen, and then there's also lots of sailing videos out there on YouTube, like this one. If you're fairly new to sailing, then you're obviously going to have quite a lot to learn about how to actually use the boat. There's lots of different ways of doing that. Courses are quite a good place to start with, especially the RWA courses about navigation. You could also buy yourself a cheap dinghy and learn to sail in that, and then sell it off before you buy your big boat. You could also crew on other people's boats, which is quite a good way to go about learning. And you could also crew at races. We did most of our learning through reading, especially books like Get Real, Get Gone by Rick Page and Yasna Tuta, and also Tom Cunliffe's series of books are a really good place to start.
A very important thing to do is to figure out how you're going to sustain yourself. You want to do this very early on before you even commit completely to this dream. You could work on board as we do, and just work along the way from the boat, and there's many ways to do that online. You could work some months of the year, especially if you're in a cruising ground where there's a winter or there's a cyclone season, so you could just stop, leave the boat and go work on land. You could also build some passive income, like renting a property back home or other sources of passive income. But the most important thing is that you need to figure this out and try it out before you set off. That's what we would really recommend, especially if you don't have a lot of savings. So for example, I quit my job a few months before we set off, but I started working freelance, which is what I do, many months before, so maybe 5 months before we actually set off, and then I quit 2 months before we set off because I knew I had a good enough income off my freelance stuff. You'll need to decide on a monthly budget quite early on, because that will determine how much money you need to make each month or how long your savings will last for. And once you set it, do stick with it, because otherwise it gets really hard once you're out there to make up for that money. You also need to keep some money aside for maintenance and a contingency in case anything goes seriously wrong. We made a full video about how to budget for cruising and how different budgets can work for different sailors, and you can find that on our channel. Next, you'll need to downsize and save up as much as you can. Try to sell, store or donate most of your possessions. There will not be space for them in the boat, and if there is, it will probably slow the boat down quite a bit. So we do definitely recommend that you take a more minimalistic approach to life. We have downsized quite a bit from our flat to our little boat, but there is still stuff that we can get rid of, and we keep on donating or selling stuff as we go along because we don't really need it. The other tip is to save up as much as you can while you're in full-time employment. There will be no time in your life once you've left where you're making as much money and you can save up as quickly. Once you're on the boat, your expenses and the lower income will mean less savings.
Unless you already own a boat that you can go sail cruising on, you'll have to go about purchasing one. At first that can seem quite daunting, but if you go about it methodically, then it's not too bad. You really want to, as a first step, get on as many different boats as you can. Preferably monohulls, catamarans, big boats, small boats, all sorts, and ideally go sailing on them, because then you can really get a feel for what features are good in a cruising boat. We'd also recommend that you get as small a boat as you can comfortably live on, because larger boats are more expensive in every sense, both in marinas, mooring, hauling the boat out, having it anti-fouled. Everything is vastly more expensive for big boats. With any boat purchase, you really need to get a survey done. When we bought Kittiwake, we paid I think £350 for a survey, but that was easily knocked off the asking price, so it easily makes its money back. You'll also get a really long, comprehensive list of things that you need to fix before you set off. There's lots of really good cheap boats around. Typically fiberglass, well-built boats from the 70s and 80s are a good place to start looking. Boats like Albin Vegas, Nicholson 32s, West Sails, Prouts, Westerlies, all of these are really good boats. You should also consider your cruising grounds. So if, for example, you are planning to cruise in the Caribbean or the Pacific, you might be better off buying a boat that's already out there, and then you don't have to sail it there. But do remember, wherever you end up cruising, there's obviously potentially additional visas and healthcare costs, things like that. When you've bought your boat, you should keep aside a third, roughly, of the value of the boat, so that you can use that for upgrades to get it ready for cruising if it's not already set up for liveaboard sail cruising. So to prepare your boat to go sail cruising, the first thing you should probably do is sit down and look at all the recommendations that the surveyor gave you when you got your survey done prior to purchasing it. Now you'll want to prioritise these. Some of these might be things which are vital to the boat's safety, like replacing through holes and things like that. And then there might be other slightly more sort of cosmetic-y type things which you might think about doing or you might not, depending on what your budget is. You'll probably also want to upgrade the anchoring gear, because most boats aren't set up for living at anchor most of the time. When we bought Kittiwake, it had a small CQR, which obviously wasn't sufficient for us being able to sleep well at night when it's a bit windy. So we upgraded it to an oversized Manson Supreme, which is like a modern good anchor. And we also upgraded a lot of the chain and rode, so that we've got really good anchoring gear and we can sleep well at night. You might also want to have a look at the electrical supply. So for example, on Kittiwake we've got lots of deck space, so we've kitted it out with really good solar panels. Not all boats have that much deck space, especially monohulls, so you might have to look at wind generators or maybe even tow-along electric generators. It's a good idea to keep the plumbing really simple on the boat. When we got Kittiwake, she had a pressurised water system which we stripped out and replaced with manual foot pump plumbing. We didn't really want pressurised water because if there's a leak then it'll empty your water tank contents into the boat, which is bad obviously because you don't want a boat full of water, but also you'll have no fresh drinking water, which is not a good idea if you're on a long passage. You also need to check what toilet you can use in your cruising grounds. In some places, particularly in America, you have no discharge, so you can't have a sea toilet that is quite common in the UK, for example. We have a composting toilet which works really well, and it's really maintenance free, and we can use it pretty much anywhere in the world. Depending on where you're cruising, you may or may not need to have a heater fitted. If you're planning to winter in the Mediterranean, for example, then you'll almost certainly want a heater. If you're sailing in the tropics, then you probably won't need one. In some ways, the sailing is the easy part and keeping the boat going is more difficult. The best thing to do is to keep your boat as simple as possible so that you can fix everything on board. Because if you have to get marine professionals in to fix things like air conditioning, for example, then you're going to pay a huge amount of money to do that. You might also need to go into a marina or get the boat hauled out to fix things, which adds up more and more money. A good place to learn how to fix things on your boat is books. YouTube, internet forums can be quite good. And there's normally other cruisers around who have encountered these problems before who you can ask.
You'll also need to choose a dinghy. Every dinghy is a compromise because there is no perfect dinghy. Each dinghy has some sort of downfalls. But some of the characteristics that you'll need to keep in mind are how easy it is to lift on board and put back into the water, how easy it is to put away and store during a passage, how easy it is to row, because obviously outboards do break quite often, and you'll want to be able to row your dinghy. You want it to be probably light enough to pull it up onto the beach as well. There's only so much you can learn about cruising before you actually try it. Not even the best course will teach you all you need to know. So at one point you'll have to start and get out there. When you do, start slowly and don't rush it. Try to maybe base yourself somewhere for a month or two to give yourself time to ease yourself into it and go out for a little day sail, then start anchoring out for the night or just for lunch. Just basically ease yourself into it as much as you can so that you don't get a bad experience that might put you off. If you go slowly, pay attention to what the almanac says, and you choose your weather windows carefully, you'll learn so much more and you'll stay much safer. Other cruises are a great resource. Making friends with them will allow you to share stories or any maintenance tricks, and as well spread word of your work. So for example, if you do any sanding or painting or any steel work, it will be very easy to spread the word and get new clients. Once you set off, don't stop learning. There will be new things for you to learn all the time. We've met people who have been cruising for 10 years and are still learning a lot of new things, just by fixing their boat or getting new problems or sailing in different conditions.
Thanks for watching this video. If you have any tips of your own to share, then post them in the comments below. We sometimes post things we've learnt along the way either here on our YouTube channel or on our blog, and you can find a link in the description below.